This is the 8th in a series of short presentations about the myths that are prevalent in risk management. The purpose of managing risk is to improve decision making so that we make it more likely that our subsequent actions contribute as much as possible to the achievement of our goals and objectives. Risk management really has no other purpose. However, unfortunately, the risk management profession seemed determined to make the simple and useful concepts and processes in risk management much more complex and opaque. This series of presentations seek to demonstrate how confused and confusing is the way many in our profession explain how we should manage risk. Myth number 8 concerns risk criteria. And in the area of qualitative risk analysis, commonly known as the risk matrix, this is about using a series of scales for rating the consequences and their likelihoods, and then comparing them and arriving at some level of risk by combining the consequences and the likelihoods. It's incorrectly called a matrix because the matrix is just there to display the outcomes. It's a means of combining what often are ordinal rather than ratio measures, so one can't normally combine them mathematically. Risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. In fact, let's be precise, it's the effect of uncertainty on our objectives, our organisation's objectives. It's not the effect of uncertainty on someone else's objectives. Risk is personal. It's about how we perceive the effect of uncertainty on the things that we want to achieve. And risk criteria are the means whereby we judge the magnitude of risk, particularly its significance, against predetermined levels of concern. We come up with a rule set which allows us to decide what combinations of consequences and their likelihoods mean in terms of significance for the organisation. They're therefore very personal to the organisation. They're the internal rules that we develop and select and use for analysing and then evaluating the significance of risk. And we also use them to select between potential risk treatments, including the action of not doing anything, the explicit decision to tolerate risk because it is no longer cost beneficial to put in further controls through risk treatment. So risk criteria, the risk rating system, is very specific to our organisation, to its objectives, to the decisions we have to make, to our structure, to, if you will, to our risk appetite and our risk attitude. And borrowing someone else's really doesn't make a lot of sense at all. They really have to be developed for the organisation, reflecting the risk attitude and risk appetite of the organisation, reflecting ultimately the organisation's objectives and its ability to deal with different types of risk. Copying someone else's risk matrix, or indeed having a standard or a standard text or a textbook giving a set of risk criteria that everybody can use, is sheer folly. All we're going to end up with is poor decision making, inconsistent decision making, and we're going to be using a rule set which is incompatible with our attitude for risk. The way we develop our own set of risk criteria is to look at our high-level objectives, and for each one of those, what are the sought after outcomes for each objectives. And then we develop measures and scales for each of those outcomes in such a way that we can easily understand and characterize consequences in a way that makes sense to us and our organisation. This must include, of course, projects and initiatives which the organisation undertakes. We can imagine that this central set of criteria may be interpreted, in other words, the language may be changed to reflect different levels of understanding in different parts of the organisation or even within projects. But at the end of the day, there is only one set of criteria for an organisation. All others must reflect that and be subordinate to it. In the same way that there is only one set of objectives, even though as we cascade down business planning, there are subordinate sets which are consistent with the organisation's objectives. So once we've decided on the scales and measures for consequences, and this includes deciding on the number of levels which make sense, many organisations use 5 levels of consequence and 5 levels of likelihood. But our experience is that 5 levels is often not appropriate. It doesn't provide a range from the trivial up to the most significant and serious levels of consequence. Or if it does, then the size of the gaps, the size of the buckets for each of the levels is too great. There's a lack of granularity. Our experience is that 6 or 7 levels of consequence works much better for most organisations. Similarly with likelihood. Most organisations seem to use 5 levels, but often a 6th level makes a lot of sense, particularly if that intermediate level pertains to the frequency at which the organisation changes its strategic plan. For example, something relating to once every 3 years. So under step 3, we have to look at the way we express likelihood using language which is useful to the organisation. Then we have to decide how consequences and their likelihood measures will be combined to develop a level of risk. And as I said before, in most cases we're dealing with consequences which are not in a ratio scale. They're in an ordinal scale, so they can't be combined with some likelihood measure in an arithmetic expression. This is the purpose of the matrix, is to combine these things, and often we will skew the matrix so that we are more averse to those consequences which are very high, which have a lower level of likelihood. In other words, we're quite averse to risks which are characterized by disastrous situations. And then we have to decide what those levels of risk mean and how we're going to make decisions about acceptable levels of risk. And again, these are very specific to our organisation, and those rules then have to be promulgated as part of the risk rating system so that we all make risk-based decisions on a consistent and coherent basis. I think after discussion you can see why it is foolish to borrow somebody else's risk criteria. They will clearly never ever work for our organisation. We must always develop our own. Thank you.